Hey everyone, welcome back. So, it finally happened. Project Scorpion started having some heat issues. Even with an open air box, Power Commander 5 installed, and the side muffler removed, my RC390 never had a problem with heat here in sunny old Arizona. But now that I've swapped the stock air filter for a K&N high flow filter, installed an aftermarket exhaust, and installed a new tune for the PCV, the engine temps went up to the top of the bottom half of the thermometer, which is no buenos. So it's time for a cooling upgrade. In this video, I'm going to show you an easy way to upgrade your stock radiator fan to something with a lot more airflow. I'll show you the tools you will need and walk you through the process step by step. On the difficulty scale of 1 through 5, 1 being installing new headlights and 5 being tearing down and rebuilding an engine, I'd put this right around a 2.5. So it's not incredibly difficult or involved, just give yourself about an hour to an hour and a half to see this project through from start to finish. Alright, let's get this show on the road and make our bikes run cooler. Alright, let's start off with the list of tools you will need for this project. You are going to need 4 and 5mm Allen keys or hex sockets for removing the fairings, the belly pan, and the radiator shroud. You will need an 8mm socket for the water pump drain plug, and a 10mm socket for the radiator fan, and to remove a plastic cover that you will need to reconnect the radiator fan wiring. Vice grips, needle nose pliers, a medium Phillips screwdriver for the radiator bleeder screw, and a small flathead screwdriver for reusing the OEM radiator fan wiring harness. Okay, so in order to start things off, we're going to need to remove both side fairings. There are 3 5mm hex screws towards the rear of each fairing, as well as 2 4mm hex screws towards the top front of the fairings. Don't forget to disconnect your turn signals, and on the left side, remove the charcoal canister and coolant hose that are attached to the side of the fairing. Alright, next we can remove the belly pan. Just 4 simple 4mm hex screws hold it in place. 2 side-by-side facing straight down towards the back, and 2 facing straight forward on the front. Okay, now something I wanted to point out. If you're planning on using the same type of coolant when you put everything back together, you don't necessarily need to flush out your radiator and cooling system. However, if your bike has a lot of miles on it and you haven't done a flush before, it doesn't hurt. Either way, you'll still need to drain and refill the coolant system, and you will need the locations of the following points of interest: the coolant overflow reservoir cap, the radiator cap, the water pump drain plug, and the radiator bleeder screw. You'll need to remove the water pump drain plug first, using an 8mm socket or wrench. Make sure you have your catch pan in place before you remove the plug, as coolant may start to drain out right away. I used a funnel here to try and limit the amount of coolant splashing onto the floor of my garage. A little coolant will probably start to leak out right away, but not all of the coolant will drain out. To help drain the radiator completely, go ahead and take the radiator cap off and tilt the bike upright to allow the coolant to drain out of the radiator. When the coolant empties out, go ahead and put the radiator cap back on tight. To finish draining out the coolant system, you'll need to remove the coolant overflow reservoir cap, with the radiator cap still on tight so that we don't spill. Now loosen the radiator cap slowly and stop loosening it when more coolant begins to drain out. This is the remaining coolant in the overflow reservoir, which drains directly under the radiator cap. If the radiator cap is not in place, the coolant may actually start to spill out from there, making a mess of your bike and your workspace. Make sure to stand the bike upright again to drain out as much of the coolant as possible before disconnecting the rubber hoses. Also, now would be a good time to clean the radiator cap if you see any buildup. Simply wipe off any gunk with a clean shop rag, paper towel, or a nylon brush to get all the deposits off. I didn't need to use any detergents to clean mine, even though it was looking pretty dirty. I would advise against using any harsh cleaners or degreasers to clean the gunk off, as it may corrode the rubber seals. If you are not going to be flushing the system, you can skip these next few steps and go straight to disconnecting the rubber hoses. Since I'm switching from the original green stuff to engine ice, I thought it prudent to flush out all of the old stuff to prevent contamination. This should ensure that we completely replace the old stuff, and that should give us a more accurate idea of just how well this blue stuff works. Hopefully it lives up to the hype. To do a proper flush, put the water pump drain plug back in place tightly and fill the radiator completely with distilled water. Once full, loosen the bleeder screw until you start to see bubbles come out. This releases any air bubbles trapped inside the radiator. Once the bubbles stop and only liquid is coming out, you can tighten the bleeder screw back down and add water as needed so that the radiator is full again. Put the radiator cap back on tight. Now stand the bike upright and refill the overflow reservoir to the appropriate marker on the right side of the tank. Once filled, replace the reservoir cap. Start the bike up and let it idle, at least until the radiator fan kicks in. This is when the coolant system opens up and cycles the remaining old coolant still in the engine out and mixes it with the clean distilled water that we just added. Now we can shut the bike off and let it cool for about 20 minutes. Once the bike is cooled, drain the system again using the steps from earlier, and repeat as many times as needed until the water comes out almost clear. It took me 3 times to get most of that green stuff out. Now we can get started on removing the radiator. Start by disconnecting all of the water hoses from the radiator. There should be 3. Use the vice grips to move the clamps over, then just pull the hoses off the nozzles. I quickly realized after taking the hose clamp off here on this left side hose, there was not enough room for my fingers to get a good purchase on the hose to pull it free. I had to wait until after I removed the radiator screws. Before we take the radiator off, we must first remove the plastic shroud. You'll need a 4mm Allen key or hex bit to take the 4 screws off. With the shroud out of the way, we can now remove the 4 screws holding the radiator in place with a socket wrench and a 10mm socket. Now with the radiator screws off, we can go ahead and disconnect that hose on the left side. Here I'm disconnecting the wire harness. If you'll notice, the third hose is still connected. I left it on just in case the radiator slips from my grip. This way the full weight of the radiator wouldn't be on the wire harness alone. Now that the radiator is off, it's time to remove the old fan. There are 3 10mm nuts holding it on. I didn't record myself doing it, but once I got the old fan out of the way, I also cleaned the radiator by spraying it with the garden hose from the backside to clean out any debris that may have been wedged in the fins. Now it's time for the new fan. I went with the SPAL 5.2-inch puller fan, part number 301-03011, which I got from EDS Auto Power Parts LLC through the Walmart website. Unfortunately, the wire harness that came on it had the wire terminals oriented parallel instead of perpendicular, so I had to swap the plastic wire harness from the old fan and put it on the new fan. Just as tabs hold the wire harness connections together, slightly smaller tabs hold each wire terminal in place. To remove the plastic wire harness, use a very small flat screwdriver to lift the tab on the wire while gently pulling on the wire to get it free. Repeat this for the wire harness on the other fan. To install the old plastic wire harness on the new fan, simply push the wire terminals in until you feel a click. Make sure to put the positive wire and the ground wires back just like I did. Once I got the old wire harness on the new fan, it was time to start putting everything back together. Since I was doing this job on my own without any extra hands, I had to get creative to make reinstallation easier. I first put the radiator back in place and put the top 2 nuts on loosely to hold the radiator for me while I reconnected the left side hose. To reconnect the wire harness, I first needed to remove the 2 bolts on this plastic cover on the right hand side of the motorcycle. For me, it was blocking my ability to reconnect the wiring. Mine were on there pretty tight, and they were an odd size, sort of in between sizes. The 10mm socket would slip a bit if I cranked too hard on it, but the 9mm was way too small. I had to use the 10mm and apply just enough pressure to coax them loose a little bit at a time without causing the wrench to slip and risk ripping the bolts. Once they broke loose a little bit, getting them the rest of the way off was a bit easier. Reach in here to reconnect the wire harness for the fan, then put the plastic cover back on. Just make sure to reconnect the 2 ground wire terminals here to the bolt on the right. And maybe do a better job of tucking those wires back under the plastic cover than I did. I still have to go back in there and fix that. Now reconnect the 2 hoses on the right hand side. the one for the overflow reservoir, and the one that comes out the bottom of the radiator. With all the connections made, go ahead and put the lower 2 radiator nuts on if they aren't already, and tighten all 4 of them down. Next, go ahead and put the radiator shroud back on. Okay, now with all the connections made back to the radiator, we should be ready to start filling the system up with coolant again. Go ahead and start by filling the radiator first. Once the radiator is full, loosen the bleeder screw just until you start to see some bubbles forming and some coolant leak out. As soon as the bubbles stop and all that's coming out is coolant, you can tighten that screw back down and check the coolant level where the cap goes. If it has gone down significantly, go ahead and refill it. Try not to overfill it like I did. Now go ahead and put the radiator cap back on. Stand the bike up and refill the overflow reservoir. Make sure the level is in between the 2 markings on the right hand side of the tank. You can now put the reservoir cap back on and start the bike up, letting it idle until the fan kicks in. After that, shut the bike off and let it cool. Then check the coolant levels again by removing the radiator cap and looking under it. Also, check the overflow reservoir again to make sure the coolant level is still in between the 2 markings on the side of the tank. Add more coolant if necessary. Alright, as long as everything is good this far, it should be okay to finish putting everything back together. You're going to need to put on the 2 fairings and the belly pan. Once everything's back together, go ahead and take it out for a ride. So far for me, the temperature gauge looks to be doing a lot better. After swapping out the coolant and upgrading the fan, I've noticed a huge improvement in the bike's ability to manage its heat. While the temperature still does climb a little bit in slow city traffic on hot summer days, the temperature gauge drops quickly as soon as the fan kicks on or as soon as the bike gets up to speed, a stark contrast from before. Well, that's going to wrap up this video, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so that I know I'm doing a good job, and so that you don't miss out on my upcoming videos. Feedback and questions are always welcome in the comments. I read them all and try to respond. As always, ride safe and have fun, everyone. Peace!